What is AI engineering?
What is AI engineering?
Welcome to Easier Said Than Done with me, Zubin Pratap, where I share with you the tens of thousands of dollars worth of self-development that I did on my journey from 37-year-old lawyer to professional software engineer. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to actually do those things that are easier said than done. I'm very delighted to have Emmanuel Maggiori. Am I pronouncing your name right?
I don't have a preference because it's
What
it's
is
a
the correct way
very,
to pronounce
it's an Italian name, but I'm not really Italian, so it's Italian heritage.
it? Yeah,
So sometimes I say Maggiori, sometimes,
Maggiori.
some people say Maggiori, and I don't take offense either way. So
That's fine. So Maggiore is the acceptable Argentinian Italian name, right?
I would
Maggiore.
say so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So we've got Emmanuel Maggiori with us today, and we're going to have a really fascinating conversation because Emmanuel's a very fascinating guy with a really, really unusual and interesting background. But more importantly, unlike all the other talking heads out there on the internet, Emmanuel's the real deal because he says less in terms of all the social media stuff and puts his money where his mouth is in some senses by actually publishing books that are deeply researched, well thought out, and based on direct personal experience. And that's why I wanted to bring Emmanuel on the show. So, Emmanuel, thank you for coming on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. Now, Emmanuel, where in the world are you?
I'm in London.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
but you didn't grow up in London, right?
I did not. I grew up in Argentina, then I lived in France for a few years, and then I came to London about 6 years ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
just before the pandemic. What made you move to London?
I was living in Nice at that point, so in the south of France, and I was kind of bored
Right.
because it's beautiful and I loved the area, and you can even I remember in April skiing in deep snow. Like it was snowing in the Alps. And it's just like an hour 45-minute drive from Nice.
Nice.
And then when I came back home, people were on the beach. And I was literally skiing like 2 hours ago. Right.
Hey,
But I got so bored. So I moved to London to find the exact opposite, very
so
uncomfortable life, but a lot of driven people that want to do something.
I bet. So you gave up the ski to the surf sort of environment and vibe for the big tech and finance vibe of
Yeah.
London. So that's great. All
Yeah.
right, fantastic. Well, I love London. I keep visiting. So the next time I'm there, I'll definitely look you up. Like I said, I have some
Yeah.
very close friends there. But look, let's talk about a couple of things because you are an extraordinary person. You're a software engineer. You're an AI PhD. You're an AI practitioner. You're an author, not just once, several times over. And you're in the course of writing your newest book around which I think you've called the Software Engineer's Pocket Guide to AI. You're releasing it as and when you write the chapters, and I'm one of the lucky people who get to read it. And also, you've got other books planned in the pipeline. So you are prolific, you're creative, and you're a fellow nerd, which is fantastic. So I'm really excited to talk to you about a lot of things.
Thank
So
you.
let's start with this, Emmanuel. What is AI engineering?
What is AI engineering? Wow. It keeps changing, right? The definition of even AI itself. But I would say, based on what I've heard even in the last few months, I would say people are trying to build AI-based products. So you have a product, the front end is not necessarily AI. There's maybe not even natural language, but in the back end, you're using AI, right? So you have a call to an API through an LLM that solves the problem for the user. And the AI engineers now are the people connecting the dots, right? They're the
Right.
people connecting the different parts. Sometimes they may need to fine tune a model, but obviously there's the old AI engineer that didn't use LLMs, right? They
Right.
used traditional machine learning. I think, yeah, but I think it's these people connecting different things, like a customer facing with an LLM, which doesn't work very well and hallucinates sometimes, having to deal with all that. I think that's part of AI engineering at the moment.
Yeah, and that was the subject of a very interesting book you wrote about. I think you called it "Smart Until It's Dumb." I think that's the title, right? Which
Yeah.
is about this, about why AI keeps making epic mistakes. I think you called it,
Yeah.
and I think you also predicted in the title that the AI bubble will burst, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the reason I asked you and started off with a very hard question.
Give me a break.
I know, right?
I'm just like,
starting with the hard stuff. And the
yeah.
reason I asked you that is there is so much, not just confusion, but I'd say active misinformation in the market about what that is. I think it's giving people a lot of false sense of ability and hope, and based on misunderstanding, which is a dangerous way for younger people to plan career changes, right? And
Mhm.
that's a space that I'm very active in because I work with people to help them achieve the career change. So digging further into that, Emmanuel, I have a lot of people who come get angry with me when I personally express the view that it's not possible. But they come to me and say, "Well, I don't see why I need to be a software engineer. Why can't I just go straight to being an AI engineer?" What is your view on that?
Mm. I mean, there's an AI researcher kind of job title where you're a very academic person. You're just doing the math. So I can imagine these people not necessarily knowing much about software engineering. But if you want to build final products, like real products based on AI, I think that is part of software engineering, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's valuable. How to even to deploy piece of software, how to configure a CI/CD pipeline, the whole thing. How do I build a solution holistically, right? I've met a lot of people in the field in the past who are, let's say, physicists,
Mm-hmm.
and they get into the field of data science. That's what we called
Right.
it until a couple of years ago. And that's totally legitimate, right? They do a lot of modeling, and then they
Yeah.
tend to work with the engineers to deploy what they do. So the engineer then needs to transform that.
Yeah. And what would you say to the thousands of people who seem to believe that you don't need to be particularly technical to build AI related products? Like they could just skip the entire coding thing, learn on chat gpt how to write some code and build an application, and that makes them an AI engineer and they can get hired for
Mm.
that. What would you say to people like that? Hi, if you want a no BS insight into how to change your career, whether to code or something else, and how to actually get job opportunities in tech, then please subscribe and like. It's no BS because I have zero incentive to mislead you. I just want to help you and give you tons of value so that you will consider working with me to get to your next career. Take a look at the description text below to learn more about the training I offer. But I do post content here regularly, and by subscribing and liking and hitting that notification bell, you will get to know when I post new industry insights for you. You'll also know within about 3 seconds if you want to learn more, but at least you won't miss out. Oh, and please follow me on LinkedIn too. I pretty much post there every single day. Just look for my name, Zubin Pratap. All right, so please like and subscribe to this channel, and let's get back to the episode.
I mean, we'll see what happens, with the job market. There is definitely a segment of people, for let's say clients, who don't really care about the quality of what you're doing
Mhm.
because it's a throw out product.
Yeah,
When you're
okay.
building the prototype and you want to see how people react to it, they don't really care. And they're already using no code tools for that. Right.
Yeah,
And there's a whole specialty of people who help build no code. The thing is, a lot of this will get done with AI, I think. Right.
yeah,
These products at the end of the day need to end up in the bin at some point, in the trash
correct.
can. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
depends on how you want to place yourself in the market. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist. There's no market for it. But most serious applications will still need an engineer, because writing good software is not about producing lines of code.
So glad you said
That's
that.
that's
Yes.
not what it is. There's so much more you need to know in terms of security, in terms of design, in terms of future proofing the code,
Yes.
right?
That's the big difference between engineering as a profession and an art and a craft and just writing some lines of code as scripting or something like that. What's interesting about what you said there is that there are many ways to do mock-ups. When it comes to actually building a real product that's going to actually go out into the market, that's a different ballgame. I know plenty of startups that use Figma mock-ups that have
Mhm.
dynamic elements to it. You can click around and go to different screens, but it's not a real functioning app. And that's not what engineering is. And that's what I keep trying to tell people, is that wanting to go skip the software engineering bit and go straight into building things with AI is a little bit like saying you want to become an eye surgeon without becoming an MD first. It's kind of
Yeah.
hard to do that.
Yeah. At which point that fails, I think, when you need a lot of customization, which happens at some
Right.
point down the line. So if you can describe a task very easily, you can have a AI build this thing for
Right.
you.
Right.
The moment you want to customize it, you end up creating a super long prompt that is almost as writing code, right? Because you
Exactly.
end up telling the AI exactly what you need from it. And that's actually, writing code is better because it's more structured, right? So when you need that level of control, which ends up happening at some point in a business, that's when AI doesn't pay off that much, because you have less control over your code. You end up having to spend more time refining the prompt, trying to get AI to do what you want. I gave an example in my book, in the book, The Survivor's Guide, that I'm writing, of this calculation of energy
Yes.
cost or something like that, right? I had to do that recently as part of my work. And this is super complicated calculation of how much you would spend on electricity, let's say, and these industrial facilities, and you have so many things to take into account, like subsidies from the government.
Right.
You turn on a generator and you produce steam with your own generator, but the steam goes somewhere. So what do we do with the steam? So it's such, if I had to tell AI how to perform this calculation, it would probably take me longer than just writing the code, because I have to go step by step. I can't tell AI calculate this, because the clients will be, oh, did you consider this? Oh, no. Did you consider that? Yeah. And I think there's also another interesting misconception about coding that I find fascinating, which is, coding has become quite easy. It's a lot about choosing the right tools.
Yeah.
I saw this post on LinkedIn, someone saying, what if in the future, this is how we code, or this is how coding is done? I think the person who wrote this wasn't really a coder. And this person writes a piece of code saying drop down box, right? Drop down select equals.
Yeah.
And in natural language, he explains this drop down box should be animated and have 3 options, colon. Option 1, podcast. Option 2, videos. Option 3, books.
Yeah.
Right. And what I say in my book, and I also spoke about this on LinkedIn, this is how we code already, because
exactly.
we're not using HTML and CSS. We use libraries of components, abstraction. So, and I showed a snippet of code using Material UI. Have you ever used Material UI?
Yeah, I have. It is the Google sort of design library and design language that went into that. Yeah.
It's literally the same as writing it. In fact, it was shorter when written, and it's totally readable. And that's how we code. And we build on other people's code, because that's what you do when you use an abstraction. So part of your work as an engineer is to choose the right tool, to find the smartest way of coding this, where you actually don't have to code. You use proven code. So when I saw that, it's like, okay, but how do these people think we're coding? Like writing binary code, like assembler? Like that's not how we code, right?
No, and I think that's what happens. You as an author would know. A lot of people think writing the book is the hard part, because that's what writing a book is all about. In your mind, you're sitting down at the computer bashing it up, but it's not. It's the editing process, it's the tweaking process, and then finding an agent, and then getting a publisher. Like those are way harder steps.
You know what the most difficult part is, which again, it's not the writing, the language, the grammar, which AI can help you with. Well, there's of course a lot of research.
Sure.
And you need to pick what to say and what not to say, but you also need to pick the angle for the book, right? So,
and you covered this really well. I should mention this. I'll put it in the show notes, but for those who are listening, you guys absolutely have to check out Emmanuel's blogs. He's written a really good blog about analyzing whether AI is likely to take over jobs. And he talks about this, but please keep going, because I think you're 100% right. Yeah.
I often give the example of writing scripts for shows. It sounds like whenever it looks fun, like it just feels like it's a fun watch. There was so much work behind it.
So much work.
So much work. Some people have been saying screenwriting will be done with AI. And I heard Claire Danes, for instance, explain in the show Homeland how they did spy camp. They met with people, including Edward Snowden or ex-CIA people, every year for a few days to brainstorm what things would be in the news next year, or were likely to be in the news, so that the show was timely. So imagine all that work to create or to write a show that clicks with people.
Right.
It's not about the grammar. There is so much work behind the scenes, right?
And it's true of everything that I've ever observed from behind the scenes, right? Like when I was a lawyer, people thought, oh, lawyers just dress around in suits and go around and argue in court. And to be honest, we spend less than 5% of our time arguing in court. That's not what lawyers do. Whether it's corporate or litigation, it changes a little bit. But most of your time is spent researching and doing some pretty grunt work that is not all that glamorous at all. I see musicians and I see how much time is spent practicing and changing one note here and there. And then you hear the melody at the end and you're like, oh, is that all there is? And they made it look easy, but they just compressed a couple of months worth of work into 3.5 minutes. It's not that way. So it's interesting to say that now. I'm going to just read out a really interesting excerpt from your blog, which I thought was particularly interesting, because you wrote the blog about whether jobs are going to be replaced by AI in May 2023, right? That's the published date on your blog. Yeah, that was a year and a half ago, just to be really clear. Yeah. It's November 2024 now. And this is before OpenAI had gotten quite as big as it had now. Like it had definitely hit the mainstream, but nowhere near as big as it is now. And we have an explosion of foundation models now and all these alternatives. Like, it was a different world. And you wrote this. You wrote, the professions that involve content creation may be the ones most often said to be at risk of an AI takeover. These include copywriting, fiction writing, nonfiction writing, journalistic writing, graphic design, translation, to name a few. But this misses the fact, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the writing the text itself is the easiest part of writing, whether it's the copy, the books, and the code. And then you go on to say the big bulk of software engineering job involves higher level tasks like understanding what the client wants, architecting a system, picking the best tools, and even advising the clients on which features to develop because they'd provide a higher return on effort made. And all of these things are judgment calls. They're not rules based. You can't write a rules engine for this. They're all judgment based and developed through experience, insight, and exposure. And so now that I'm a practitioner from inside, I totally understand what you mean by this. But I think it's a little bit hard for people outside who still think being a doctor is like what you watch on ER, or being a lawyer is like what you see in Suits, or being in the army is like what you see in Rambo. Like, that's not the real world.
Yeah. And I appreciate that now, trying to be a writer myself. And I think it's very easy to comment about other people's professions without actually having done the job before.
And
right?
insight, yeah.
But, and when the end product is the easiest to consume, it's the most difficult to make, actually. When you just watch a show like Friends or The Office, and you're like, you laugh, and you're like, oh, this is... But AI can do it. Like, do you know the work behind? There's this podcast called The Office Ladies by the two actresses, or two of the actresses from the show, from The Office, and they tell the behind the scenes stories, and it's crazy the amount of rewriting or the amount of content that's discarded. And a show like Friends, it was shot in front of a live audience because they wanted to gauge the reactions of people. And if people didn't laugh at a joke, they would rewrite it on the spot and do a show of hands so that people could pick the best lines. There is so much work, behind the scenes.
And I've heard this several times. I have friends in showbiz and the movies, and they're like, you have miles of footage that never makes it, that gets dropped onto the editing room floor just to have a few 100 feet of what gets to the public, And when you really think about the amount of work and time and thought and planning and craftsmanship that went into everything that got thrown away. Just mind-blowing.
And you said something like, there's no recipe, I don't remember your words to do that, but there's no algorithm that we know of to write a successful TV show, or if there was, everybody would do it. That's very philosophical. But and I think with products and with software engineering in particular, I think we need to see ourselves as software as a means to an end. Your goal is to create a product that clicks with people. And that's very, very hard to do. You need to understand your audience, your customer. And I encourage software engineers to be involved in that process. Right. So if you're the software engineer who translates a Figma design into a front end, that is quite mechanical, right? So your job could maybe be replaced at one point. But if you're this engineer that helps a startup build a winning product, because you, even as a software engineer, you tell your supervisors, this is a bad idea, building this feature. Because business people sometimes don't know how hard it is to build something. And maybe there's an alternative way that's equally good for the business, but a lot easier from the technical point of view. And you can suggest, so you're involved in the business and you want to make it successful. And that looks really good in your CV, and it future-proofs your career quite a lot.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said future-proof, because I'm not kidding. My next question is, what's your advice to people who want to future-proof their careers? And I'll give you some context, because I work full-time, I'm in engineering, but I also, coach people on career change, because, I was 37, 38 when I went from lawyer to coder. And fortunately, I didn't have any of these misconceptions about the world when I made that switch. I knew it was extremely hard. You need a very good plan, and you need to be professional grade at what you do. You can't be an amateur and expect to break into a new industry, right? And I also knew that future-proofing careers is a very difficult thing to do, because kind of like what you said, it's not the thing you do, whether you're in law. I've been in law management, I've done my own startup, I've done all these things. It's not the thing you do, but it's the impact of the thing you do that really matters. That's actually the goal behind the goal. It's not the lines of code you produce. It's not the feature you built. It's the impact of that feature on some metric that matters for survival or for thriving, right? And so with that sort of framework in mind, Emmanuel, for all the people out there in their 20s and early 30s who really want to, whether they change career, they're trying to go deeper into engineering or move from an adjacency like data analysis or data science into software engineering, whatever it is, a lot of them are really worried, oh, is AI going to take my job? Because that's what the headlines say, and they don't realize the impact AI is going to have on everything. But you talk about in your blog about focusing on high-end, excellent work. Tell us a bit about your thesis around good enough versus high-end and what gets automated.
Yeah, I think there's a continuum on that line. On one end, you have the good enough work, right? Like the SEO articles, right? Blog articles that are just packed with keywords. People used to hire
5 languages you must learn this summer to be a good software engineer. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And parentheses like 2024, right? They put that in the title. So you think it's like super. Everybody knows this is just packed with keywords.
Yeah.
To drive traffic into the website. Nobody cares if a good article or well researched.
I did an entire podcast episode on this, Emmanuel, and I'm like, this is the real situation. That's what's happening in these blogs. They're not trying to teach you. They're trying to grab your attention. Yeah.
Did you see all of these comparisons? We're going to compare these two things, but they're not comparisons because it's just features of A option and then features of B. That's not a comparison. You're just listing things. Yeah. All these SEO articles, that's on the low end of this quality spectrum. But in every field, there's a super high end. In some fields, it's easier to get there. In some, it's not. So you need to pick a career. And also, there needs to be market value for excellence. Right. People need to want to pay for that excellence. Right. Sometimes it doesn't happen that much, and you need to be realistic. But I would position myself on that high end of the spectrum. So, and specifically in software engineering, help companies build successful products that have a lot of impact, right? That are used by a lot of people. Try to do that instead of just translating Figma to a front end and just do that.
The mechanical stuff.
I've spoken a lot with translators, who are suffering quite a lot from the AI revolution. That's a bit of a tough situation because a lot of clients do not care about excellence. So excellence does exist, right? AI does the low end work in reality, and it does that with translation. Translation is okay. It's just fine. It does the job, but I've seen how literary translators work, for example. It's the job they do. It's amazing. One person told me, I don't translate what the text says. I translate what the text does.
I saw that in your blog. Yeah.
Yeah. So very difficult work. Now, I spoke with a group of translators who specialized over the years on translation of websites, like a hotel or a restaurant.
Yeah.
Hotels or restaurants, honestly, don't care so much about the quality of the translation, right? Yeah. I mean, maybe some hotels would, These people, they see that their clients, they can use AI and do the job. So you want to position yourself in this end of the spectrum where there's a lot of excellence and it's paid, right? People accept, people value that excellence. So I think that's one of the things you need to do in your career.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about this translation thing, because the danger that I see with people when they use AI is they think that AI will help them do things that they don't know how to do. But my problem with that is, if you don't know what success looks like, how do you judge the outcome of the AI, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really important problem to understand, because, for example, translating. So just to give you an example, back in 2003, when I was starting out in my legal career, I was working in the UN, and I was in Vienna for the anti-corruption treaty negotiation. And there were these booths all along the back of the auditorium where all these dignitaries are negotiating, and the booths were filled with translators who are translating in real time. They're listening to something and they're translating into multiple languages so that other people can listen in. And I spoke to a couple of them after that, because I thought this is a really hard thing to do. It's an all-day thing. People are talking without thinking that the translator is trying to translate. And they have to get it accurately, because this is diplomacy, this is international relations. It's not the kind of thing you can be shoddy with, right? And then I was comparing furniture or instruction manual translations, which are rubbish. And because you have pictures, okay, you can get by with that, but you can't get by with bad translation at the international level, at the international business level, at academia, in teaching. So again, to your point, which I think you just made me think of this, there are certain pockets where excellence in that skill will matter, and other pockets where it won't matter. And we want to steer away from the ones where excellence doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, and also the gravity of mistakes, right? Because in some fields, it's okay.
Yeah.
to make some mistakes. So if you're a software engineer working on, in the aerospace industry,
Right.
you might be safer from being replaced with AI because people will be very careful, hopefully,
Right.
you know,
Hopefully.
before launching a rocket.
Right.
So yeah, and the legal professions again, you can't really, or hopefully a lawyer will properly validate a contract that has been
Right.
translated, right? Because,
Right.
and this is the other thing, AI does make mistakes and
Right.
nobody knows how to fix them. And they happen kind of randomly. And that is, if you told me that an AI translation is perfect, then I would tell you, yeah, the UN should be using that potentially instead of humans. But it's not 100% accurate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the reality that we need to factor in. We need to, if you want to do a good job with AI, you need to also consider its limitations. And at the moment, AI is the kind of thing that gets you 80% of the way.
Yeah.
It doesn't do it 100%. Sometimes when you consider the missing or the remaining 20%, you realize that
Yeah.
actually it's more work to use AI or it's not what you expected. But yeah, I think that falls into the, I speak about excellence, but I also speak of validation sometimes.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
want to learn a lot about how to validate, how to produce robust software that is properly tested, even in the era of AI, right? So how do I measure AI's performance at a task? How do I do benchmarking? Because it's not going to be 100%. So, but is it 99 or is it 95 or is it 70?
Yeah.
So how do I measure, and how do I measure that in an unbiased way? Because this is the other problem, right?
Yeah.
People make a mess with the data and you overestimate performance through
Yeah.
selection bias, for
Yeah.
example. Right?
Yeah.
So you end up picking the models and the data that seem to work fine, but maybe it's just random or the AI is good only on that data and not other data. So
Under there.
there
Yeah.
are processes to do this, which I explain in the book.
Yeah.
And this whole thing around validation, I think if you
Yeah.
want to protect your job, you could also position yourself as the person that builds robust software.
Yeah. Speaking of robust software, I should raise that. I actually meant to tell you this, and I completely forgot. I was speaking to a friend of mine from ThoughtWorks, who's quite a senior engineer and does a lot of consulting for on the AI ML space and very knowledgeable, and stuff like that. And I was asking him questions, which I'll be really honest, I only knew to ask because I read your book, the Engineer's Pocket Guide to Surviving AI. And thanks to you, that book made me look really smart because I was asking questions about how do you test this stuff and how do you ensure that
Okay.
there's not been overfitting or there's not been, random sampling that's actually selecting, with bias. And he was like, Zupin, you've done your research. And I'm like, well done. I was thinking, good job for reading Emmanuel's book. So for those of you who are listening, definitely pick up this book. It's available on Manning, and you can sort of check it out for free online and then pick up the actual physical copy, which I encourage you to do. It is truly, whether you're a practitioner of software engineering or not, it is truly the best on-ramp I've seen. So kudos to you. It's the best layman's explanation of all the pieces and the jargon, but it's built up in a sequence that makes sort of pedagogical sense. It makes sense to the user, as they navigate. It's stacked brick on brick on brick on brick, and you have the wall. So outstanding job. And I, as an educator,
Thank
I know
you.
how hard it is to do
AI
that. So,
can do that,
no, I was just,
That's
that
what
was going
AI
to be my
can do.
conclusion. AI cannot do that. AI cannot take a person like that on a journey on education. They just cannot do it. So
it sometimes it seems like it, right? Because you just tell AI write a podcast, and but it's usually a lot of blabber. It does sound like it's doing the job, but what happened with this book is
yeah, it's good enough,
I
but
just
not
say
excellent. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. So
Yeah.
the work I did to choose how to say things in which order, that was the hard part.
Hard part.
How do we scaffold the different, and there was a lot of content that got, eliminated or that moved somewhere else, or that was the goal, and that's what made it hard to write.
Oh, I
The
really
emphasis.
appreciate it because I live that problem every day. And I was just going to say, like when I'm coaching my students, a lot of people will come to me and say, oh, just give me a curriculum or tell me what it is, how you get people the results. And I'm like, here's the thing. I'm going to spend 8 weeks, no less, at least 8 weeks, getting to know everything about you, your life, how you use your time, what level of knowledge you have. And then I'll build you a plan because that sequencing is important.
And there's something what you're saying there. The work you're doing, it's very hard to write down a list of steps on how to do it, right? And I think that's the work that will survive AI the most. When you can't even imagine what that list of steps is like.
Yeah.
Right. because there's like this human, we can't really say, okay, if I want to coach this person and I need to know everything about it, what does that mean? Can I just hire a freelancer to do that for very low pay or get AI to do it? And you're like, no, because there's like some component to it. I spoke with a journalist a few weeks ago. Actually, she was part of the audience in a talk I was giving. And I asked the audience, can you guys describe the job you do as a list of steps? And most people said no. And there was this journalist, for instance, she was telling me, my job is about building connections in my local area because people trust me and they know I'm not going to waste their time. So when I need a comment from, let's say, an important business person, I can reach out to them and they will answer the phone because they know me and we've built a relationship. If I move to a new city, she told me, I can't work. My work has been building trust, relationships. How do I write down as a list of steps, build relationships with people and trust? And what some people want us to believe is that the two goals are the same. Some people say this is stochastic parrots. And I mean, when we look at it, it's very, very convincing. It is useful for certain things. But yes, like you say, this reasoning, like it's very philosophical what reasoning or deducing stuff actually means.
Yeah.
So maybe there is a bit of that because of this overlap, but there's also definitely not completely that.
No.
So it's not.
And I think, to your journalist example, or to, even the way you assemble the book, it took so much thinking of different points of view. It wasn't a calculation. It was a sort of grasping between a combination of intuition and experience, which I imagine is very different for different people. It depends on their experiences. It's probably almost impossible to model how the model of consciousness would work. I don't know, who knows, right? Or your journalist friend building those relationships, being able to read what the other person, reading the room is not necessarily something that's a statistical thing. It's, it's because cultural differences play a big role.
Yeah, but the fanatics will tell you, oh yeah, a computer could in theory just see lots of videos of people interacting in a room, But there's one mystery with the whole AI thing, which is that at the moment AI learns by repetition, right? Machine learning.
Yeah.
And when there's a long tail of events, like a long tail of unusual things that don't happen very often, AI gets confused.
Yeah.
Right? However, for some reason that we don't fully understand, we humans, we don't get as confused and we can cope with, right? When you're driving and something really strange happens that you've never seen, you react in some cases much better than the way AI reacts.
Yeah.
And there was this example of this car, I don't remember if it was Waymo or Cruise, that crashed, a self-driving car that crashed into a tow truck that was towing a car in an unusual way. And then another car did the same 10 minutes later and hit the same truck. And the company kind of excused this. They said on a blog article, they kind of blamed the truck for towing the car in an unusual way. A human does not get confused because this is part of the long tail. You've never in your life seen this kind of awkward towing of a vehicle. However you got it, you're not going to hit it, right? And AI gets confused. Why do we humans have this layer of processing somewhere where we can cope with such unusual situations? That's still something a lot of people are researching and trying to understand.
Do you think, Emmanuel, that could be something around metacognition? The reason I'm asking that is because we think about thinking, and we reason about reasoning as well. So, because the example you gave me just reminded me of something that happened to me about 3 months ago. I was driving somebody else's car. It's a car that obviously uses AI to recognize stop signs and, keeps me in my lane. It recognizes the lanes. It's pretty modern technology. It sees other tail lights in front of it at night. And if I'm too close, it'll automatically brake a little bit. Like it'll modulate. It'll literally change the way I'm steering if I'm too close to the line. You can feel it. I can feel it on the steering wheel, right? And I was going around this corner on the freeway and there was a big reflective board there. And it is nice and polished. And my two headlights bounced right off it, right? And my car braked. There was nothing in front of me.
Right.
And I was thinking, why? Like, I knew that was just a reflection, but I have a feeling the car thought that was oncoming headlights because of the cleanness by which it was bouncing back. And I'm like, at no point of time did I think that was an oncoming car. At no point of time, right? Yeah. So that was and I was thinking, I was trying to reason in my head. I'm like, why did that happen? Okay, this must have been what the AI thought. It's exactly the point.
Yeah.
Maybe, do you think it's a metacognition layer?
A metacognition. I think that's very philosophical territory. I I think there's something special with us that we do that we still don't know what that is. That is just
Mm,
not the typical machine learning algorithm, for
mhm.
sure. Right. I
Right.
don't think we just learn from repetition, like by, there are, I've heard, some people say we have some meta learning rules that we're born with. It seems that even babies, they know how to use a process of elimination, even dogs, to learn very
Yeah.
early in their lives. This is Roger Penrose, the physicist, who has
Yes.
been saying this for a while, and he's been ostracized for it. But he's been saying for a while that there's something non-algorithmic in our brain, something meaning that you can't emulate that with
And reduce the
a
rules. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah with to digital computing rules,
Yeah.
basically, right?
Yeah.
He thinks some quantum mechanics yet undiscovered could do the job.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very humble position. He spoke with the Lex Friedman podcast, and he says something that I think there's something special, something about consciousness that is mysterious that we don't understand. I think that my position with all of this is that I think there's so much we don't know or
Right.
understand about this. But the
Right.
position of a lot of other people is, oh, we're just computers, and yeah, in theory, yeah, just give enough examples and the computer will
And a
learn.
mechanical view of the human mind. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, I remember watching, I think, a David Chalmers. I don't think Roger Penrose in that, but where we're talking about neural correlates of consciousness not being the
Mhm.
causal factors. They just
Yeah.
correlated neurally. And I was like, actually, that makes a lot of sense because it's hard to understand. But we go into very philosophical territory, very, very philosophical
Yeah.
territory. So
It's fascinating though.
look,
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. But yeah, I have a feeling a lot of the people listening will just want to know, hey, should I worry about AI or should I not? Right. And so, what would your message or encouragement be to people, who want to get into engineering because of the promise of AI? So there are some people who want to avoid engineering because of the threat of AI. There are people who want to get into engineering because of the promise of AI. And I mean, obviously, I would strongly recommend your book. I cannot recommend it enough. I'm not just saying this because Emmanuel's on the show. Emmanuel hasn't paid me to do any of this. I
Thank you.
took a look at Emmanuel's book and then I reached out to Emmanuel after reading a couple of his blogs because Emmanuel's thinking is, in my opinion, really, really comes from hard work. He's not an influencer. He's not there just spinning out sound bites. He thinks, he researches, and then he makes a lot of effort in his writing. And to publish a book is so much harder than writing a LinkedIn post. So you must be seriously committed to do something like that. So that's why I got Emmanuel on the show. So Emmanuel, what would you say to those people who are on the fence about switching from another career which may not have much future to something like software engineering, but they worry that may also not have future because of an AI threat? What is your message to them?
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, I think some things will change with AI in the software engineering field. I do not think it will disappear. I think we'll still be writing code for a lot of the reasons we mentioned today,
Yeah.
because engineering is now really about writing code.
Writing.
But I would say to those people, first of all, understand that code is a means to an end, right? So if you can position yourself as a person, your passion should be, I don't know, I'm not going to say should be, because some people really, really like purely technical work, and that's totally fine. But if you can position yourself as a kind of in between business and technology. So
Mm-hmm.
I am the person helping a company attain a goal by building a product with whatever it takes. It could be AI, it could be no code, it could be code.
Yeah.
Right. So engineering as a way to build cool products,
Yeah.
right, that
That are
are
commercially
ultimately
valuable.
used and commercially viable.
Yeah.
The caveat for me would be a lot of the technology sector has been kind of, overhyped or going through a rough patch. A lot of people got fired over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens with the sector. But one of the big problems with technology is with the tech sector is we keep building products that nobody wants. And we keep doing that and getting a lot of money and funding for it. Right.
Which is the entire subject of your Silicon book, which I was
Yeah.
eye-opening. And for those who are listening, if you want a shorter
Yeah.
version, not version of it, but if you want to see the central thesis for what Emmanuel's saying, check out the blog maggiori.com, and I'll put it in the show notes about how being employed in tech but almost never worked. It went viral, I think,
Yeah.
on Hacker News or something. It just got picked up and went mad.
I know.
Because, right.
It went totally viral. I didn't know it would. It was not. I just wanted to document my experience. I never thought anybody would read it, and it went totally viral.
I think it started with you saying, I work for a top tech company and I spent 2 weeks of productive works and 18 months of not doing very much at all.
My last real job, like now I'm working in a different way, selecting more carefully what I do. But my last normal corporate job, I worked, I think, a total of 3 hours in 6 months. And I know a lot of people in the same situation. I even know people who have had two jobs at the same time for 5 years secretly. It is a thing, the idleness in the sector. Not everyone, a lot of people work hard, but there are a lot of people who don't. And that's
Yeah, there's a
how,
lot of overcapacity. I noticed that as well. Yeah.
yeah. So I feel like if you want to enter this field, you should know those things, because I think the best way to be successful in the field, and if you want your career, again, to be future proof, try to, if you can afford that luxury, try to work on things that you think will actually be used by people, right? I think that over time, that looks better in your CV, right? If you built a product that was commercially successful, you help build a product that was commercially successful, or somehow push the boundaries of anything, But if you using a very trendy technology, right, and you knew it very well, but you didn't build anything that was ever used, I think that will be harder for your career in the long term. And that's unfortunately 95% of the opportunities out there in the tech field are to build stuff that nobody will ever use. And everybody knows that from the start. And that's the sad part.
Yeah.
You're building a product.
It's a public hoax. I mean, that's very strong words, but it's almost like a conspiracy that everyone is sharing in, because it kind of suits many people to be that way.
Yeah. And this is something I've been thinking about, and I want to do research on. There's a lot of it already in my book Silicon, but the incentive structures. And as you said, that all of these decisions that lead to bubbles, like the unicorn bubble we had in 2021, they could be perfectly rational for the people involved. Because when you make money from investing other people's money, regardless of the success of the investment, which happens a lot in the field, then maybe investing in a crazy idea, it just pays off for you, right? So it's actually a good decision. And for
that person in the food chain, it's actually rational from their point of view in their shoes.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. And you could say, in the long term, it's not good for your career to make investments but it's been documented that a lot of investment managers, they still get a job even if they worked for a failed fund, because they gained experience, working on it and stuff like that, right? So that's the thing. The incentives, may be not very well aligned with building successful software that stands the test of time, or successful products, that stand the test of time.
It sounds like your big suggestion for people is be highly intentional about the kind of work you do, why you're doing it, and what the consequence of it is. And I love that you're saying that, because, and just so that everyone knows, we didn't have any staging or agreement on what to say before this. We literally got on and started talking. But that's actually exactly, I spent an entire week with my students saying, ignore who's paying you to do it. Ignore what the marketing brochure says. Try and find out who you're working with and what you're doing every day. Right.
Yeah.
And if you can get to those two things, I would say 9 times out of 10, ignore the brand. Don't worry about who's paying you to do it. Make sure it's work that matters, with people that you like and respect and can get up in the morning and want to be with. Like, those two things will have a much bigger impact on your sense of well-being and productivity than working for a fancy brand, working for, whatever it is. Like, it's just.
Yeah. And, a lot of people over the past couple of years have reached out to me to share their stories. And I discovered how many techies are miserable, and making a lot of money doesn't help. So it's such a difficult thing to speak about, because you sound totally spoiled, right?
And you sound elitist when you say it. Yeah,
you sound elitist, you sound spoiled. But these people that get paid a lot to do nothing, or to work on a product that nobody will ever use, they're not happy, because that's not what you sign up for in this profession. You are a nerd. You love working with numbers, with technology, but you actually want to do something good with it. You want people impactful. And I think it's a good thing that you feel bad about making a lot of money without producing really impactful work. It's a good thing you feel bad, right? From a social point of view, it's good to not feel good about that kind of work. But a lot of them are miserable because of that. And the problem is that they feel like they change jobs and it's always the same. you go from a big company to another big company and you think they sell you this, we're building this super fancy technology. And then you realize when first day on the job and you're like, okay, so nobody really knows who the client is.
Yeah.
We don't know what we're building. We've overhired, so nobody's doing anything. So all we do is go to meetings to kind of pretend that we work or go to meetings to speak about meetings.
Yeah. Or
This,
validate some senior director's sort of decision on how to use the budget, right? Like, we want to do
yeah,
this. Yeah. I've seen that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen, again, senior managers who were like, okay, AI is all the rage. Let's create a team of 70 people to work on AI. And they hire 70 people without knowing what they will do
Want to
with
do.
AI.
Yeah.
And this sounds crazy, but I've seen it more than once.
Yeah.
I've seen teams of 60, teams of 70, teams of 12
Yeah.
being created without any idea of what they would do, or even a validation that AI would work.
Yeah.
Like build a little prototype, 2 people to find a use case, and then grow the team. Now let's just, put a lot of people in there.
I will say this, Emmanuel. This is not unique to tech. I noticed this in my previous careers as well. The same thing, and I noticed it in this context, like in the law, in private practice law firms, you can't really overstaff beyond a point because you have to hunt what you kill. So you bill in 6-minute increments. Your client
Yeah,
has to see the bill and they pay the bill, and they will not be happy if your bill is filled with padding. Okay, you can't
yeah,
sandbag stuff. They're not going to pay. So when you're every hour of your time is accounted for, there's not much fat in the system. People don't do that because there's no way to get away with it, right? But the moment you go to legal practices in some in-house situations that I've sort of indirectly seen is when you don't have the time-based billing model and no one's accounting for the time, suddenly there's a lot of extra capacity in the system that looks
I
busy,
see.
right? And so I've noticed this outside of tech as well. And I've also
Mhm.
noticed the tendency both in management and in law, where people are so obsessed about trying to see or trying to appear that they're ahead of the curve that they will
Mhm.
over optimize for something without doing the due diligence of the research. And
Mhm.
they'd rather be early to something than slow to follow, right? And because there's
Yeah,
all the psychology around that. And then they basically overhire without having a clear plan. So exactly what you say. I've seen this in previous industries as well. I think it's a human nature thing. You said it right. Our incentive mechanisms drive these kind of behaviors, either social incentives, financial
yeah,
incentives, or promotional incentives.
yeah. And I think that because some people, I mean, I understand that it's human nature or whatever it is, that it does happen a lot. Some people sometimes try to convince me that it's a good thing anyway, because this is how stuff gets done, right? And I think, and the question I like to ask, or the thing I like to remind people is opportunity cost, right? So the people or engineers that work for Juicero to build that fancy juice pressing machine, but even like I'll give you another example. I had a conversation with someone about this. WeWork, right? This guy told me that it changed the real estate industry. It changed some business models and also even changed offices, which are prettier and have nicer coffee machines now, right? So it did change the industry, right? So it looks as if even though WeWork failed as an experiment, thank God we did it because now things have evolved,
Yeah.
right? But you are missing one part of the equation, right? Which is what could we have done with those resources otherwise, right? So maybe it's true that offices will be uglier nowadays, or even the business model or like co-working spaces will be uglier like now if WeWork hadn't existed.
Yeah.
But what could have been done with the resources? What if these people working for WeWork had discovered some sort of new nuclear reactor? Like that sounds extreme, but you need to consider the things that you miss out on, by not
So
doing
great.
other things, right?
This is
And
what I loved about
yeah,
the article in your book as well, is that you consider that, which most people don't think about that. What other things may have emerged that now haven't
yeah.
got the chance to emerge, right?
Exactly.
Love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
And we can know, right? We can rerun history to
Yeah.
see what would have happened, but we need to keep that in mind, right? Obviously, something good can come out of any situation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's
Yeah.
always a
Yeah.
silver lining, but is this the cloud we want to be betting on? Is the real heart of it. And I love that you think about that because it's one of the overarching philosophies in my coaching practice. When people come to me and say, I want to become a coder, one of my first 5 questions is why, and
Mhm.
often if their goal is something that they can achieve without coding, I'm like, don't code. You can achieve this code in the other
Yeah.
thing. And I use the exact same point, opportunity cost. But a lot of people don't actually understand opportunity cost. They don't think about it, or they don't process it and think about it much. And so they get very caught up in, but this is the path that I think is right. Instead of saying, well, what is your goal require? Does it need this? Does it not need this? If it doesn't need it, why do it?
Right.
Find a shorter path, which means assessing opportunity cost for your effort and your time.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
I really love that you think about that. So look, before I let you go, because I know it's been a long conversation, and I'm sure you've got other things to
I've
do.
been enjoying it. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I could go on for hours, and that's the problem. I don't want to do that to you or the audience. But I've got to ask, and this very selfish interest, I consider myself to be a fairly hyper productive person, but I have to step aside and salute you. So how the hell do you find time to code, research, write new books, keep on top of the market, keep on top of philosophy? How do you manage all of this? Serious, dead serious question, because I want to steal your playbook.
I mean, I am quite stressed all the time.
That's the
I'm doing
inside
like,
secret. I know about my
I
life
know
is like
it's
that too.
been, I mean, I've done a lot of part-time work also lately, right? So instead of working full-time, which
Yeah.
has allowed me to do other stuff,
Yeah.
I've also had tech jobs where I didn't work, like we said, which helped. But I think it's a bit weird because I feel like there's just a book in me that needs to come out,
Mm.
right? And I just can't help it. So I end up working on weekends, or
Yeah.
sometimes it's been like a 7 days a week kind of thing. So I've been doing a lot of that. But yeah, but I think, one good thing is that they feed onto each other, right? Because for example, I've been traveling to give talks based on my books, right? They
Mm.
sometimes invite me to give a talk. But when
Mm.
you go to an event to give a talk, you usually meet other people, right? Or even the organizers invite
Mhm.
you to dinners with other speakers, and you learn from them. So, I just bring new ideas then to
Yeah.
my day job, right?
Right.
And another thing I also try to do the most is, again, work smart, not hard, in
Yeah.
the sense that you say, I'm coding, I'm writing, and I always try to take a step back. Whenever I code, for example, I never
Mhm.
go on code. I try to
Mhm.
think of the best way to solve this without
Yeah.
coding, because
Yeah.
somebody must have done this before,
Right.
right? So what's the best way? And sometimes it takes me a while, and I prefer to think and I think that's what more senior engineers do, right? That sometimes I've seen junior engineers not do as much, right?
Yeah.
When they try to fix a bug or kind of override a certain library, the
Yeah.
behavior of a library, because it doesn't do what I try to take a step back, and if I see this is now what this library was built for. So what the client is asking will require a lot of custom work, right? So
Yeah.
before I go and do it, I actually tell my client, you know what, can we just not do this and do this other thing that,
Yeah.
it's not what you asked, but your client could equally like it,
Yeah.
but it's super easy. And
Yeah.
that's most of my work. It's not
Yeah.
coding, right? It's trying to find that solution
Yeah.
that will work. And
It's
that's
an optimization approach. One of the things that I truly believe makes us stand apart would be if we measure twice, cut once. Just slow it down, think
yeah,
through it, take a little bit more time to think. Or as Abraham
yeah,
Lincoln said, give me 6 hours to cut a tree and I'll spend 5 hours sharpening my axe.
right.
It's the
Yeah.
same
Well,
principle.
that's what I do.
Yeah. That's
And
that's
that's
exactly the
how,
same
yeah.
principle.
And
Yeah.
that's how I'm more productive, and I have energy, especially to work on
Right.
writing on the side, on the
Right. And
weekend
then, and
sometimes.
like you said, the writing is the easy part. It's thinking about it and turning it
Yeah.
over and over and over in your head. And that's exhausting. That's mentally
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
tiring.
I think I'm also even trying to develop my own method with regards to writing that is similar to this axe thing that you
Right.
said, because when I started writing, I had to rewrite a lot. And now I'm trying to, okay, can I also take a step back? For instance, I'm concocting a new book for next year, and I try not to just go and write. And it's difficult to find that balance, because also if you don't write anything and you just over plan, it just never works, because you kind of need to write also to see
To bring it
how it's
out of
going to
you a
come
little
out.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
otherwise you can't just plan what you're going to say every sentence.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to find that sweet spot
Mm.
so that I can do it productively. And it hasn't been the case sometimes. But in the beginning, it was like you write a chapter, then you basically rewrite it a second time.
Yeah.
But it's quicker because now you're kind of reorganizing things that
Yeah.
exist. But then you rewrite it a third time and then a fourth time. So I'm trying now to plan the work a little bit better from the beginning, but not overdo it,
Right. It's interesting you say that because I have the same conversation with my students when I give them a custom made plan. I always tell them, I'm like, it's a tough thing to explain, but you have to strike that balance where you feel you understand enough to move forward without understanding everything. Because if you try to
Right.
understand everything right now, you will never move forward.
Which is very good advice. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I try
Yeah.
and encourage them, and they keep coming back to me and say, oh, I'm stuck at this. I'm not stuck at this. And I work through it with them. And I say, you know what? I think it's okay for you to go forward because you're going to revisit this concept later on. It'll embed deeper once you do it a second time,
Yeah.
and that, and the pattern will become clearer. Don't over
Mm.
optimize for this now. You'll lose 3 weeks needlessly, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's
That's
a
very
hard.
good advice. Yeah, that's very good advice. And I think engineering is the same, right? And again, that's your job. A good engineer, that's what they do, right? It's not writing code. It's finding that, sweet spot. I think, yeah, that's the biggest part of the work because then it's so natural, right? When you pick the right tools and you spend some time and then it just
It snaps
works
into
very
place.
smoothly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also you sort of tend to think about, well, how do we maintain this thing? And what are the things that are likely to
Hmm.
continue to blow up in our face? And if it does, how do you mitigate it? How do you test for it?
Hmm.
How do you protect against it? And unless you think through some of the stuff, but again, it comes with experience. I wouldn't expect somebody who's just starting out to even know what they don't know, right? But after a while,
Yeah.
you start to see the patterns. You're like, oh, I've seen this before. This didn't work quite so well. And you analyze, you do a meta analysis on why, observe the pattern, extract the pattern, and let go of some of the
Mhm.
detail, and then go by pattern based
Yeah, and
mental model.
I wish people taught you that because there's a lot of experience that's been gained by other people that you're not taught that when you go to uni, to college,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't the case with me. You just learn technical stuff. Your teachers most likely have never worked for a company. They've always been in the academic world. So finding that right balance,
Yeah.
and there's advice on that other people can give you. And I wish someone had taught me that and not me learning it by, trial and error and
Trial and error.
developing my own method ultimately.
1000% I
Yeah.
but I also want to have enough confidence, and that's a balance. That's a judgment
Yeah.
call.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's the
see,
secret.
man, love nerding out with you, but I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for your time and your wonderful perspectives. I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to put a bunch of things in the show notes. I'm going to put a link to your blog. I'm going to put a link to your LinkedIn, and I'm going to link to certain specific blogs as well that I think people will love to know
Mhm.
about the AI and jobs thing, and also the incredibly insightful and amusing but serious conversation that you had in your blog about all those years in tech where people may not have worked or they're
Mhm.
overemployed in some senses. And I will definitely be linking to the Engineer's Pocket Guide because I think while yes, it has engineer in the title, I think people who are engineering curious can also get a lot out of it. It doesn't require you to have an engineering background to understand it. It was so beautifully written. And definitely a link to Silicon as well, which was a really, really interesting book. I really enjoyed
Mhm.
that. So thanks for everything you do, Emmanuel. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you taking the time. Thank you and have a great day.
Awesome. You too. Thank you very much.
Do it. Just subscribe. You know you gotta do it.